A Shavua Tov, a good week to you. How's everybody doing? That's Keep Alive doing their musical version of the Blessings of Havdalah. It's a new week. Let's start it right. We light up the darkness. And we're going to learn some beautiful Torah with whom? Nancy in North Carolina, Gwen in Kalamazoo, James in Annapolis, Melissa in Great Neck, Judy in Southern Oregon, Leah in LA, Bella in Florida, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Patsy in Lake Worth, Florida, Ruben in San Antonio, Elvis, now I know, welcome Elvis, saying Shavua Tov from upstate New York, Lindsay in Cincinnati, Annie's got Michigan in the house. Over there on the YouTube side, Aoife in Florida, Faith in Oregon, and Yitzhak in Kansas City. Welcome, everybody. We are on page 18 here in Tractate Yevamos. We're in chapter 2, and today we'll be finishing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 in chapter 2 and going on to Mishnah number 2. And basically the question we're going to be examining tonight is yibum, right, and specifically, is the yibum bond, right, before the surviving brother and the widow. In this case, right, if you're joining us for the first time, we're examining the mitzvah, the commandment of yibum, levirate marriage, that if a man and a woman are married and they don't have children and he dies, but he has a brother, so the Torah says that the surviving brother should marry the widow, his sister-in-law, even though normally there's a prohibition on ever being with your brother's wife. But here that is overridden by the commandment because your brother died childless, only if he's childless, so that the child of this union, the first child of this union, would become the heir of the brother who died. Now, the question is yibum, or is the yibum bond substantial? Now, you always have the alternative mitzvah that they can perform. They don't have to get married. They can perform chalitzah instead, which is a ceremony, a ritual, in which they recite a verse from the Torah. She takes off his sandal, literally, and then they don't have to perform yibum. But before they perform a yibum-or-chalitzah, there is some kind of a bond. There's an obligation. She can't go marry someone else without first performing chalitzah, right? Until she performs chalitzah. Now, she might be exempt from both yibum and chalitzah because she has some other kind of familial relationship with the yavam, the surviving brother-in-law. Or because there were two wives of the man who died, and one of them has some kind of familial relationship with him. She's his daughter or otherwise closely related and therefore prohibited in marriage to the brother-in-law. And then the co-wife would be exempt also, as we learned, according to the opinion of Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai disagreed, but the law is according to Beis Hillel. The question we're looking at now is, okay, before they perform yibum-or-chalitzah, in a case where they are indeed obligated to, but let's say they don't do it. Before they do yibum-or-chalitzah, one of them dies. Or without performing yibum-or-chalitzah, she just goes off and marries someone else, violating a prohibition. So how substantial is that bond between them? Before they perform yibum or chalitzah, and what are the implications of the fact that this bond exists? They are somehow bound to each other. It's not a marriage, it's not a betrothal, but it's something like, and that we're examining how substantial that bond is. So we pick it up at the bottom of page 17b. And Rav Yehuda said, in the case of a widow who dies, while waiting for her brother-in-law to perform chalitzah or yibum, so he is prohibited from marrying her mother, right? So you're not allowed to marry a woman and her mother ever, right? Even after the woman dies, you can't marry her. If you're married to this woman, you can never marry your mother-in-law. It kind of makes sense. Who would really want to do that? But yes, that is a law. So he never married this woman. She was his brother's wife. While she was his brother's wife, he could certainly marry her mother. He has no otherwise prohibition. Two brothers can marry, one the mother, the other the daughter. But the one who was married to the daughter died before he had children. So the surviving brother now has this bond, right? So if he performs chalitzah, so he was never married to her, and I think he can marry the mother. But before he does chalitzah, before he performs chalitzah, this woman dies, right? The widow of the one who died, now she dies before they perform chalitzah or yibum. So he was bound to her in some way and wasn't able to say, no, we're not going to get married with the official ceremony of chalitzah. So can he marry her mother? The question depends on whether that bond that existed at the time that she died was substantial, right? So Rav Yehuda said in the case of a widow who dies while waiting for her brother-in-law to perform chalitzah or yibum, he is prohibited from marrying her mother. And the Gemara comments, so apparently Rav Yehuda holds that the levirate bond, the bond of yibum, even before yibum is performed, is substantial. And this would mean that the attachment between the yevama, the widow, and the yavam, the surviving brother-in-law, is like that of a marriage, and that the yavam is therefore prohibited from marrying her relatives. But it must be asked, why does Rav Yehuda say it in such a way? Let him say the law is in accordance with the statement of the one who says that the yibum bond is substantial. Now the Gemara responds, if he would have said that, I would say that with regard to the yibum bond, this applies in the case of one brother, but if there were two brothers, then the yibum bond is not substantial. This is a case where there were three brothers. The one who got married and didn't have children died, and now his wife comes up for yibum with one of the surviving brothers, only one of them. But which one? Since it could be either one, in the case of each individual, if you just look at him, so how substantial could that yibum bond be? He doesn't have to do anything. If his brother steps in and performs either yibum or chalitzah with the yevama, then this brother doesn't have to do anything, and there was no bond for him. But when there's only one brother, okay, so he's definitely obligated. There's no other choice because there's no other brother. And so perhaps it's only substantial when there's one brother, but when there's multiple brothers, it's not. But now the Gemara objects to this. But when the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishna, disagree, wait a minute. Yeah. So when the Tanaim disagree, and they disagree in a case of two brothers. So how could one think that Rav Yehuda is speaking only in the case of a single brother? Rather, one must say, if he were to say that the conclusive halachic ruling is that the bond is substantial, now we're in 18a, I would say that the yibum bond applies as long as the yevama, the widow, who requires yibum marriage, is alive. But after her death, the bond was terminated. Right? So, okay, there was a bond that he had with her, and she died before they could do either yibum-or-chalitzah, but she died. They never got married. Okay, they didn't perform chalitzah, but they never got married. How could you say that this bond is so substantial that it's considered as if he were married to her, and therefore he's precluded from marrying her relatives? In other words, after the yevama died, any relationship between the two dissolved. And this comes to teach us that the bond is not terminated without cause, but instead requires an actual act, such as chalitzah or yibum. Until one of these acts is performed, the bond remains in place. So let us say that it supports Rav Yehuda's opinion from that which was taught. If his yevama dies, he is permitted to marry her sister. From here, the Gemara reduces her sister, yes. Her mother, no, in accordance with the opinion of Rav Yehuda. Why? Because you cannot marry two women at the same time who are sisters. Right? It's prohibited to marry your when they could have multiple wives. You couldn't if your one woman was is your wife, and then you're going to take a second wife. You can't take a woman who is the sister of your existing wife. After that wife dies, you can marry her sister. You just can't be married to sisters while one of them is alive. But with a mother, you can't marry her ever, right? You can never marry your wife's mother. If you were married to a woman, you could never marry her mother, even if your wife dies, God forbid. So what they're saying here is, in terms of that bond that's formed with the widow, it somehow, for these purposes, resembles marriage, even though he was never married to her. And therefore, if she died before they performed chalitzah, he could marry her sister, but he could not marry her mother. The Gemara rejects this. Well, the same is true that even her mother is permitted. So according to this, the bond is not substantial, right? And this language was used only since he taught in the first case of the Baraisa, if his wife dies, he is permitted to take her sister, specifically her sister, but not her mother, as she is forbidden by Torah law. Therefore, he also taught in the latter clause that he is permitted to marry her sister. So before I continue with the discussion, let's just see where this discussion ended up, right? Where is the law? What will the law be? If there were two brothers and one died childless, that's gonna come a little later in our discussion. I'm gonna get to the halacha a little bit. All right, so Rav Huna bar Chiya raised an objection to this from the Mishna. If he performed levirate betrothal. So levirate betrothal is weird. Levirate betrothal is unnecessary. Betrothal is like engagement. But in the ancient world, when you became engaged, it had the force of being married. You hadn't consummated that betrothal yet. But once you had this formal betrothal, so then you are prohibited from being with other people. You are now bound to each other. And if you decide not to consummate that betrothal, you would need to give a get. You would have to get a formal divorce, even though you had never been together as man and wife, because betrothal has that power to preclude you from being with other people in the world. Okay. So if you have a yavam, right, the brother-in-law, and the yevama, the widow, they don't need betrothal, right? As soon as, if they decide that they're going to perform yibum, they only need to have marital relations, to sleep together, and then they're considered married because they already do have some kind of a bond as yavam and yevama. If they don't want to do that, then they can just perform chalitz and be freed from each other. But sometimes they would do this, right? They would say, okay, yes, we are going to get married, and they are now have a yibum betrothal. According to some opinions, it's meaningless because they had a bond anyway. But okay, so if you do this, so what happens? So Rav Huna bar Chiya raised an objection to this from the Mishnah. If he performed levirate betrothal, pre-yibum betrothal with her, and then he died, so then the second woman performs chalitzah and may not enter into yibum. They were co-wives. And this implies that the reason is specifically that he performed a pre-yibum betrothal with her. Had the brother not performed this levirate betrothal with her, the second woman would also be permitted to enter into yibum. And if you say that the yibum bond is substantial, then she would be considered a co-wife of the wife of a brother with whom the third brother did not exist by that bond. And since the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist is prohibited from entering into yibum, her co-wife would likewise be forbidden from doing so. Now this goes back to the Mishnah that we're discussing, Mishnah number 1 of chapter 2, and this situation where there were 3 brothers, but the third brother is born after the first brother dies, right? So the first brother, he had a wife, he died. His wife came up for yibum with the second brother. The second brother already had a wife, but he took his sister-in-law in yibum, and now he has 2 wives. But then he dies childless, and there's this third brother that was born after the first brother died. Now the issue with him is he has no yibum obligation vis-a-vis the wife of the oldest brother who died before the youngest brother was born. So he has no yibum obligation, and therefore a co-wife of somebody who he has no yibum obligation is also exempt from yibum. Now Rabbah said, this should not be read precisely. The same is true even if the second brother did not perform levirate betrothal. So now we look at the example of what if the second brother didn't take the widow from the oldest brother in yibum, but rather performed yibum betrothal with her, and then he died, right? So now what happens to his wife? Is she exempted from marrying the baby brother because she was sort of the co-wife of the widow from the oldest brother, that the middle brother only made a yibum betrothal, but not an actual yibum. So if she's considered the co-wife, then she's free to go. There is no yibum-or-chalitzah for her vis-a-vis the baby brother. Or if the levirate bond was not substantial, or let's say they did not perform the betrothal and the levirate bond is not substantial, so then the wife of the middle brother does come up for yibum with the baby brother, because they did coexist, right? He was alive when the baby brother was alive. Right. So Rama said this should not be read precisely. The same is true even if the second brother did not perform this levirate betrothal. So then the second woman must perform chalitzah, but she may not enter into yibum. Why? Because this levirate betrothal did something. Right? It did something. They weren't co-wives, but they were almost co-wives. And because of that, we're going to say that yibum is off the table, but she has to perform chalitzah to make sure we've got our bases covered. And the reason that it teaches the case of levirate betrothal rather than just the levirate bond specifically was in order to exclude the opinion of Beis Shammai, who said the legal status of levirate betrothal with a yevama eligible for levirate marriage is that of a full-fledged acquisition. So according to Beis Shammai, if you make this levirate betrothal, it's like you slept together and performed yibum. You haven't consummated it, but you're going to have all the obligations as if you did perform yibum, and therefore you're married. And therefore, if there's a co-wife, they're co-wives, full-fledged co-wives. And it is legally binding to the same degree as an actual betrothal. Therefore, even chalitzah would be unnecessary, similar to the case of a rival wife of a familiar forbidden relation. Right? According to Beis Shammai's view, the fact that the middle brother performed this levirate betrothal means that his wife and the yevama from the oldest brother who died are now considered co-wives. And if one of those wives, and then he dies, so if one of those wives is going to be, prohibited to the youngest brother, or not yibum applicable because he didn't coexist with the oldest brother, then the co-wife is going to be exempt too. Abaye raised an objection to this from that which is taught. In the case of two brothers who coexisted, and one died without children, and the second arose to perform levirate betrothal, and with his yevama, but he did not manage to perform levirate betrothal before a third brother was born. And then the second brother, who also had a wife, died, whereby both women would fall before the newly born brother for yibum. Then the first goes out and is not obligated in levirate marriage because she is the wife of his brother with whom he did not coexist. And the second woman, who was the wife of the second brother, either performs chalitzah or enters into yibum. But if you say that the levirate bond is substantial, no levirate betrothal, but just the bond itself, if you say that that bond is substantial, then the wife of the second brother would be rendered a co-wife of the wife of the brother with whom he did not coexist by that bond, right? And so if she's rendered a co-wife just by the virtue of the fact that she was a yevama to that second brother before he died, then they're co-wives, and then that second wife doesn't come up for yibum before the baby brother because she's the co-wife of the yevama of a brother with whom he did not coexist. So the Gemara rejects this argument. In accordance with whose opinion is this? It is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who said the yibum bond, the levirate bond, is not substantial. And the Gemara asked, does Rabbi Meir hold that the levirate bond is not substantial? After all, unattributed Mishnayos are in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And didn't we learn in a Mishnah on page 26a of this tractate, in the case of 4 brothers, 2 of whom are married to 2 sisters, if those married to the sisters died, whereby both sisters fall before the surviving brothers for levirate marriage, then those 2 sisters must perform chalitzah and may not enter into levirate marriage. And it would seem that the reason for this is that each of the sisters has a levirate bond to both remaining brothers. Very interesting. let's just go over that for one quick second. If I got my magic marker handy. So let's see if we can follow that quickly, right? So there's 4 brothers, Reuben, Shimon, Judah, and Zebulun. Okay? And these guys are all brothers. And then there's 2 sisters, okay? Dinah and Miriam. And so Zebulun marries Miriam and Judah marries Dinah. Okay, and then they die. Now what happens is Dinah and Miriam are both up for yibum, each with one of the brothers, one of the surviving brothers. Which one? Could be either one, right? This is one of those situations why you say, is the levirate bond substantial or not? Well, maybe not when there's multiple brothers, because either brother could perform the duty with one of the sisters or both of the sisters. Now, what's interesting is because Reuben and Shimon both have the possibility of taking either sister in yibum, so it's like they are now sisters who are co-wives, right? And you can't go any further down that track. So because the levirate bond is some kind of substance, so then they have to perform chalitzah with these brothers, and they cannot perform yibum, according to this opinion that we're going to encounter later on page 26. And so they're saying, well, so the justification for that must be that the levirate bond has substance. And if it enters your mind to say that Rabbi Meir held that the levirate bond is not substantial, well, didn't these 2 sisters come from 2 different houses, as each was married to a different brother? So if so, one brother should take one in yibum, and the other should take the other one in yibum. What's the problem? They're going to end that the result is fine, right? They end up that each brother takes one of those sisters, and in the end, it's like the same as it was in the beginning. There's 2 brothers married to 2 sisters, which is certainly permitted. But during the time when the first pair of brothers dies, and before they do yibum-or-chalitzah, they each have a yibum bond to both brothers. And that's the problem. So the Gemara answers, actually, in Rabbi Meir's opinion, the levirate bond is not substantial. And the Mishna states that they perform chalitzah and do not enter into levirate marriage because he held that it is prohibited to nullify the mitzvah of levirate marriage. That is to say, it is prohibited to act in such a way that the mitzvah, the commandment of levirate marriage, becomes obviated. Under these circumstances, there is a concern that perhaps as one brother performs levirate marriage to one of the sisters, the other brother dies before he manages to perform levirate marriage to the remaining sister. If that were to happen, you would thereby nullify the mitzvah of levirate marriage, since the sister that would now fall before the remaining brother would be his wife's sister, and therefore prohibited from entering into levirate marriage with him. It's because of the risk of that, right? That if Reuben, takes Dinah in yibum, and the plan is that Shimon is going to take Miriam in yibum, but Shimon dies in the meantime. So now Reuben is married to Dinah, and Dinah's sister comes before him for yibum. So it would, at that point, that would be a no-go, right? So that she would need neither chalitzah nor yibum, because she can't, perform either chalitzah or yibum with a man who's already married to her sister. In order to prevent that situation from coming up, it's better, according to this opinion and what Rabbi Meir is saying, it's better that both perform chalitzah, one with each of the women, so that the mitzvah of chalitzah or yibum was performed twice. Whereas in the situation he just sketched out, in case one performed yibum and then the other died before chalitzah was performed, then that second instance of yibum/chalitzah would be obviated. And to make sure that doesn't happen, Rabbi Meir said, no, you both have to perform chalitzah, yibum off the table. And the Gemara objects. Wait a minute. Would be, and therefore prohibited. Right. So the Gemara objects. But if the levirate bond is not substantial, then let the mitzvah of levirate marriage be nullified. That is, if the levirate bond does not carry any real obligation, so then the mitzvah itself never truly came into effect. What difference does it make if it gets pulled off the table in that situation? As Rabban Gamliel said, the levirate bond is not substantial, and it is permitted to nullify the mitzvah of levirate marriage, of yibum. As we learned in a Mishna on page 109 of this tractate, the Mishna discusses a case of two brothers who were married to two sisters. One sister is an adult, and therefore her marriage was fully effectual. And one sister is still a minor, and she was orphaned from her father, and her marriage was valid only by rabbinic ordinance. And if the brother who was married to the elder sister died, then that elder sister falls for yibum before the brother who's married to the minor. He's waiting for her to grow up, but they're betrothed. Now, under these circumstances, the sages suggested that they should direct the minor to refuse her marriage to her husband, right? And when a minor is like sort of brought, is betrothed to an older man who's waiting for her to grow up to marry her, but she's now prohibited to any other man, but she has a choice. She can refuse that husband. And if she refuses him, it's as if they were never married. So in this situation, they would say to her, so refuse this man. So now you're free. You can just go grow up and then marry whoever you want to. This man is not married to this young girl. Therefore, he can take her elder sister who comes before him for yibum. Now, in that situation, or now under these circumstances, the sages suggested directing the minor to refuse her marriage to her husband so that he would be able to take his brother's wife in yibum. If the minor does not do so, he would be unable to take her sister in marriage, as she would be the sister of his wife, the young girl, and thereby fully exempt from the levirate obligation. And Rabban Gamliel said, if the minor refused in the meantime of her own accord, then she refused. But if she did not refuse, let her wait until she reaches the age of maturity, and then that other adult sister will be exempt from performing chalitzah or levirate marriage due to the fact that she is his wife's sister. And here it is apparent that Rabban Gamliel is not concerned about nullifying the mitzvah, right? According to Rabban Gamliel's suggestion, don't do anything. If the young girl wants to stay married, she could stay married. And if she wants to refuse the man, she can make that choice. Well, it wouldn't even come up because you just let her make up her own mind. If she wants to stay married to this guy, she stays married to this guy. Even though that will mean that her older sister, once the young girl becomes an adult, and she becomes an adult at 12, so once she becomes an adult, which could be soon, then the older sister is free, right? There's no chalitzah and there's no yibum. So according to Rabban Gamliel's suggestion, we would take a situation which would have led to chalitzah or yibum, and just remove the chalitzah or yibum. We have nullified the yibum situation through our actions. And he says that's okay. Whereas the sages that disagree with Rabban Gamliel says, wait a minute, we shouldn't create a situation where there was a yibum situation and then it was taken away. So to preserve the option of yibum-or-chalitzah, we should direct the young girl to refuse her betrothed and let the sister come and perform yibum with him, or chalitzah. So Rabbah said to Abaye, do you wish to raise a contradiction between the words of Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Meir? So this would imply that the contradiction needs to be resolved. But statements from two different Tanaim do not need to agree or to be resolved, right? They could just disagree. And Abaye responded, no, in fact, this is what we meant to say. How could one possibly say that Rabbi Meir is concerned lest there be nullification of the mitzvah of yibum, even when it is uncertain, because perhaps the first brother will not die, whereas Rabban Gamliel is not concerned that the mitzvah be nullified even when it is certain? It is surprising that there should be such a great difference between the opinions of these Tanas. Rabbah answered, perhaps the one who is not concerned about nullification of the mitzvah of levirate marriage, Rabban Gamliel, is not concerned even if the nullification is certain, right? Because if the girl says, no, I want to keep my husband, then the mitzvah of yibum is nullified. And the one who is concerned that the mitzvah might be nullified is going to be concerned even if the mitzvah only might be nullified. In the case that we said before, where one brother might die before performing yibum when there's a pair of brothers and a pair of sisters. So with regard to the actual dispute between Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda, Abaye said to Rav Yosef, this law stated by Rav Yehuda, that even if a woman is waiting for yibum, that even if a woman who is waiting for yibum dies, her mother is still forbidden to the yavam because the levirate bond is substantial, is from his teacher Shmuel, and not from Rav, who is also one of his teachers. Okay, let's get that right. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, this law stated by Rav Yehuda, right? That if you had any moment where he had a woman that was before him as a yevama, but they didn't do yibum-or-chalitzah, and then she dies, can he marry her mother or not? That's a function of he can't marry the mother if the yibum bond by itself is substantial. So it's like he was married to the daughter, and therefore he can never marry the mother. So Rav Yehuda said the mother is forbidden. So according to Abaye, speaking to Rav Yosef, it must be that Rav Yehuda held like his teacher Shmuel and not like his other teacher Rav. And evidence of this can be found in that which we learned in a Mishna that's going to come up on page 41 of our tractate. Now we're on 18b. In the case of a widow waiting for her yavam to take her in yibum or perform chalitzah, if his brother betrothed her sister, they said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, they say to the brother who betrothed her, wait and do not marry your betrothed until your brother performs the required action, either chalitzah or yibum. And this is because until that time, the levirate bond is still applicable, and the woman betrothed to you is forbidden to you as the sister of a woman that is bonded to you. And Shmuel said, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. From here, one may infer that Shmuel holds that the levirate bond is substantial. So Rav Yosef said to him, and if it were the opinion of Rav, what problem would there be? And Abaye said to him, it is difficult because then there would be a contradiction between the opinion of Rav and another statement of Rav. Since Rav Huna cited Rav, and the conclusion from his statements was that the levirate bond is not substantial. And he said to him, Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda each cited Rav. Perhaps they are Amoraim, rabbis of the Gemara, later rabbis than the Tanas, the rabbis of the Mishna. Perhaps they are Amoraim, and they disagree in accordance with the opinion of Rav, i.e., with regard to his opinion. What is his opinion? They disagree. And the Gemara answers, since that which was stated in the name of Shmuel was explicit, while that was stated in the name of Rav must be explained as an Amoraic dispute, we will not leave that statement said explicitly in the name of Shmuel and explain it as an Amoraic dispute according to the opinion of Rav. Now Rav Kahana said, I reported this discussion before Rav Zevit of Neradea, and he said, that is how you teach this, without knowing for certain that Rav Yehuda was stating the law in the name of Shmuel. We learn it explicitly. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, in the case of a widow waiting for her yavam, who died before he could perform chalitzah or levirate marriage, he is prohibited from marrying her mother. Right, so that's where we started, that Rav Yehuda said that, but now we're saying, and he said it in the name of Shmuel. So apparently Shmuel holds that the levirate bond is substantial, and Shmuel conforms to a standard line of reasoning, as Shmuel also said the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, who also said the levirate bond is substantial. And the Gemara comments, both statements by Shmuel on the subject are necessary, and there was no redundancy here, as if he were to teach us only the principle that the levirate bond is substantial. I would say that this applies only to the case of one yavam, but not to the case of two. Right, as we discussed before, that if there's only one brother, okay, we all agree that the bond is substantial, but in the case of two brothers, it's not. Is that the only time that it's not substantial, or is it insubstantial in other ways? And this comes to teach us that even in the case of two yevamim, of two brothers, there is a bond. And this is the conclusive halacha put forth by Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. And if he were to teach us only that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, I would say that this applies only in the case where the woman awaiting levirate marriage is living. But after her death, then even if there was a bond while she was alive and before they perform yibum-or-chalitzah, but after she dies, then there's no bond. And so the man who was bound in that way to a woman should be able to marry her mother. But according to this opinion, the levirate bond is substantial, and it was substantial even after she dies, and therefore he's still prohibited to marry the mother. And this comes to teach us that the levirate bond is not terminated without cause, meaning that either yibum-or-chalitzah was performed, but rather it is necessary to perform some act in order to exempt her from it. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 2. Now, Mishnah number 2. If there were 2 brothers and one died, and the second entered into levirate marriage with his brother's wife, while he was already married to another woman, and subsequently a third brother was born to them, and the second brother died. Now let's just trace this. It's again the situation of the brothers who did not coexist, which is what seems to be what we're discussing here in chapter 2. Right? So we have Reuben and Shimon, and then there's going to be Yehuda, who's the third brother, but he's going to be born later, right? He's the baby brother. Okay? And so we have 2 brothers, and one died. So Reuben was married to Miriam, right? And then he died. So Miriam is now going to be married to Shimon because he performs yibum with her. And Shimon already had a wife, Dinah. Okay? So now they are co-wives of each other with the second brother Shimon, and subsequent so 2 brothers and one died, and the second one entered into yibum with his brother's wife while he was already married to another woman, and subsequently a third brother was born. So now Yehuda is born after this situation already exists, and subsequently a third brother was born to them, and then the second brother died. Now Shimon dies. Okay? And then the second brother died, whereby both of his wives happened before the third brother for yibum. So now Miriam and Dinah come for yibum with the surviving brother, Yehuda. Right? So Yehuda was never alive when Reuben was alive. Reuben died before Yehuda was born. But when Yehuda was born, Shimon was already married to both Miriam and Dinah. So then what happens? Second brother died, whereby both of these wives come before the third brother for yibum. Then the first woman, who was the wife of the first brother, Miriam, she is exempt from yibum due to the fact that she is the wife of a brother with whom she is the wife of Reuben, with whom Yehuda never existed, did not coexist. And the second woman, who was the first wife of the second brother Shimon, she is exempt due to her co-wife, because she's the co-wife of Miriam, and Miriam is exempt from yibum and chalitzah with Yehuda. So then Dinah is also exempt from yibum and chalitzah, and there's no yibum or chalitzah to perform. If the second brother had performed only levirate betrothal with her and then died, right? So, which is really the same as that they had a yibum bond but didn't perform yibum or chalitzah. But let's say they did levirate betrothal. Shimon said, I will marry you, Miriam, but he didn't do it yet. Okay, so then it's just this levirate betrothal bond. So then what? If the second brother, Shimon, had performed only levirate betrothal with her, and then he died before fully marrying her, then the second woman, Dinah, performs chalitzah with Yehuda, but she may not perform yibum with him, as the levirate betrothal is not considered a sufficiently valid marriage so as to render her the rival wife of a relation forbidden to the third brother, but is not so sufficiently inexistent as to allow Dinah to perform yibum with Yehuda. And that's why Dinah's only option vis-a-vis Yehuda is chalitzah. Now, Rabbi Shimon says, with regard to the first clause of our Mishnah, the third brother enters into yibum with whichever one he wishes, or he performs chalitzah with whichever one he wishes. Since he was born after his second brother had already entered into yibum with his first brother's widow, she is considered the wife of a brother with whom he did coexist, not the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist, and therefore he may enter into yibum with her. According to Rabbi Shimon, the fact that he didn't coexist with Reuben at the time that Reuben was married to Miriam is irrelevant. right? Because he did coexist with Shimon. At the time that he was born, Shimon was fully married, in the first clause of the Mishnah, fully married to both Miriam and Dinah. So it's just a simple case. The fact that Reuven was alive before Yehuda was born is irrelevant. And it's simply a case of this is the brother of a brother who had two wives. So he performs either yibum-or-chalitzah with one of the wives, and then the other wife is exempt. Gemara. Rav Oshaya said, Rabbi Shimon's opinion differed even on the first Mishnah. That is, Rabbi Shimon disagreed not only in the case stated explicitly in this Mishnah, in which the newly born brother came into the world after the widow of his first brother had already married his second brother, but Rabbi Shimon also disagreed in the case of the first Mishnah in the chapter, right? Mishnah number 1, where the third brother was born prior to his second brother entering into Yibum with the widow. From where is this derived? Rav Oshaya came to this conclusion from the fact that it teaches a superfluous Mishnah. How so? In accordance with whose opinion is it teaching the section of the first clause, i.e. the previous Mishnah, Mishnah number 1 of chapter 2, if we say it is the opinion of the rabbis who prohibit marriage to the wife of a brother with whom one did not coexist in all cases, even if she became married to a middle brother in between. If we say it is the opinion of the rabbis who prohibit marriage to the wife of a brother with whom one did not coexist in all cases, then let us look at the second Mishnah. Now, that even in the case where the second brother entered into Yibum, and afterward the third brother was born, such that when he found her, i.e. when he was born, she had a permitted status as she was already married to the second brother. She was never in his lifetime the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist, but was in fact, for him, the wife of a living brother. Nevertheless, even under such circumstances, the rabbis prohibit him from entering into Yibum with her because she was at one time the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. Nevertheless, even under such circumstances, the rabbis prohibit him from entering into Yibum with her. Is it necessary then to teach the case presented in the first Mishnah of a third brother who was born, and subsequently the second brother entered into Yibum with the wife of the first brother? According to the opinion of the rabbis, this first Mishnah is redundant. Rather, is it not that it was necessary to teach this first Mishnah for the opinion of Rabbi Shimon? And if so, this is how it must be understood. The first Mishnah was taught in order to convey to you the far-reaching nature of the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, which allows even the case specified in the first Mishnah, and the latter clause, i.e. our Mishnah now, was taught to convey the far-reaching nature of the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Shimon, that even if the third brother was born after the Yibum marriage to the second brother, she remains forbidden to the third brother. And by right, it should have been explained that Rabbi Shimon disagrees even in the first Mishnah, but the author of the Mishnah waited until the rabbis finished their words, and then he went back and wrote that Rabbi Shimon disagreed with them in all cases, right? So what we're seeing now is the Gemara is saying, well, Rabbi Shimon disagrees, as stated explicitly here in this Mishnah, but he would have also disagreed with the case as it was stated in the first Mishnah. And the only reason it wasn't stated in the first Mishnah that Rabbi Shimon disagrees is because the guy who compiled the Mishnahs, Rebbe, let the rabbis give both opinions before he noted that Rabbi Shimon disagrees with both. And the Gemara asks, but according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, how can you find this case of the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist? And the Gemara answers, it is in the case of a single brother who died and subsequently another brother was born. Here, the widow would be the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist, and she would not be required to perform chalitzah or enter into yibum with him, because there was no middle brother. Alternatively, it can be found in the case of two brothers, one of whom died, and the remaining brother did not take the deceased brother's wife in yibum, and did not die, and in the meantime, a third brother was born. She still has the levirate bond due to the deceased brother, who was a brother with whom the newly born brother did not exist. And the Gemara proceeds to clarify, is this where I want to stop? I think this is where we're going to stop. Yeah, that's enough for tonight. We're going to stop there because we'll get into Rabbi Shimon's position tomorrow at the regular time, 6 o'clock on Sunday, 6 p.m. Pacific. And this is a good place to break. Sorry I didn't give you the one paragraph warning before saying I was going to end. Okay, let me see if there are any questions or comments. Always good to keep the Saturday night class not too long since it's really late on the East Coast. Okay, so this was Yevamos 18. Bill, okay, I'll admit it. I've lost a step somewhere. How can one be compelled to chalitzah but not permitted to yivum? Because there's this bond that is somewhat of a bond, but not really, right? What I mean is, what is the reason that someone may be ineligible for yivum but still eligible for chalitza? It's a great question. Surely, as chalitza is the alternative mitzvah offered by the Torah, it and yivum have parity. One who is unable to legally perform yivum ought at least to be exempt from chalitza, at least to my mind. Again, I'm certain I've lost a step here, probably someday it doffs back. That said, the very fact that we are in this situation at all does lend more credence, at least to me, to the idea that the sages prefer chalitza to yivum precisely because yivum is, well, frankly, a mess. Exactly, that's right. They also prefer chalitza to yivum because the yavam might not have the pure intention only to build his brother's house, but if he has any kind of like lust to the woman who would otherwise be prohibited for him, then it's a bad situation, and that's why chalitza is preferable. But what we've seen here, and maybe I've already answered the question since you asked it, you asked it and then I answered it during the class, but just to try to repeat, they will say chalitza is mandatory in a situation where you had a co-wife who wasn't exactly a co-wife, right? There was a wife, and then there was a woman who came up before this yavam for yibum, and then, but before yibum-or-chalitzah was performed, she died, right? So then, and then he dies. Right, and so now was this, and now there's a third brother. So was this woman who was married to the man who was a yavam for the oldest brother? She was married to him, and then the yevama from the first oldest brother comes before that middle brother, and then she's either going to become his wife or they're going to perform chalitza, and then she was never his wife. But before either one of those things happened, she died, right? Or you could even say he died. Nothing was finalized, right? And so now you have one woman who was his wife and another woman that he had a levirate bond with that was unresolved, right? So since he wasn't exactly married to her, now you would say that, so she doesn't become a co-wife that exempts the third brother because he didn't coexist with the oldest brother. But also it wasn't that she didn't exist, in which case the middle brother's wife would come for yibum to the baby brother, and so that's that situation where because of just the levirate bond without resolution, they're going to say chalitza yes, yibum no. So that's that situation. Yosef, do you know of any resources I can use to visualize these scenarios with charts? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The Koran has charts sometimes like this, but I find them a little bit difficult, I must say, where they like, depending on the patterns, help identify who's a brother, who's a sister, who's a co-wife, who's a mother, who's a daughter. The bottom line is this stuff is difficult. At the speed that we're moving, I can try to draw charts sometimes to try to clarify as we go along. But to really understand these situations so that you're 100% sure you grasped it, you really got to slow down, right? And, Daf Yomi is not the way to grasp and retain everything that we're learning. If you really wanted to understand Yevamos, you'd probably spend a year studying it and go very carefully through each situation. So don't worry if you're not grabbing all of it. That's just the very nature of Daf Yomi. It is a somewhat superficial dive because it's just too much material on every daf to fully get it. Now, I agree with you, charts would be helpful. So I don't know a resource where these charts are published. You could Google it. The Koran Talmud has some, but it's not exhaustive. It's not a chart for every situation. I'll try to draw it out whenever I can. But sometimes it's just okay to kind of sit back and, just let it go even when you're confused for a little while, because eventually the point will emerge, and that's the point that you need to take. You're not going to get every detail of it. And that's okay. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Sunday night, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, for page 19 here in Tractate Yevamos. All